Hello everybody, my name is Professor Rich and today we're talking about critical thinking for English learners. How are you doing everybody? My name is Rich and I'll be your teacher for today. Hello to everybody in the chat. And here is today's topic, critical thinking. So our first question of the day might be something along the lines of why learn critical thinking as a learner of English. Here we're setting the rationale for why bother. I mean, we're here because we want to learn English, right? So why should we have an interest in critical thinking if we're not some sort of philosopher or lawyer or something of that type? Well, let's have a think about that, and I will give you my thoughts in just a moment. Let's just take a little moment here to say hello to everyone. Hello to Manuel. Hello, Julia. Hello, Shimi. Hello, Bavia. It's nice to see you after a long time. Yes, it's been a bit of a while. We did have a warm-up a few weeks ago, but now, hopefully, we're coming back full time, hopefully. Let's see how it goes. So, critical thinking. Arguably, a skill which is becoming more and more important. But for learners of English, why bother? Well, first point. Often, as language learners, we think, what is the correct thing to say in a situation? So, what is the correct way to apologize? What is the correct way to order a bottle of milk? When do you do that? What is the correct way to order a coffee in a restaurant? We're talking about, like, what is the correct way, but perhaps a better question when considering the kind of language to use is why or how. In other words, why should I use this form or that form? How do I sound more polite or less polite? So, in engaging with critical thinking skills, in improving our critical thinking, we don't just look for the correct answer. Instead, we start to ask questions about why something is supposedly the right thing to say and how we can say things differently. And so that is obviously helpful for the diversity of our language. Next point. English is, of course, the lingua franca. You might have heard this term, lingua franca. It's Latin. So lingua franca basically means default language or common tongue. It means that amongst the global population, the place that we go to communicate is English. Now, a long time ago, it was Latin. And that's why Latin was the language of academia. And before Latin, it was ancient Greek. And that's why the New Testament is written in ancient Greek. Because these were the lingua francas of the time. Now, and probably for the rest of our current civilization, English is the lingua franca. No, it won't be replaced by Chinese. That's essentially an impossibility. It's going to be English until there's a complete collapse of civilization. So what that means is, if you're going to go into situations where critical thinking is required, which of course includes academia, business negotiation, or diplomacy, then you're going to be dealing with these things in English. So, of course, it makes sense to connect English with critical thinking, because you need to apply critical thinking in those situations. And we'll talk about why that's important a little bit later on. Let's move on to confidence and independence. So one of the great things about critical thinking, and one of the reasons why I personally like critical thinking, is that critical thinking gives you independence. That's kind of the point. That if you are unable to engage with the skills of critical thinking, then it means you're relying on other people to tell you what to think and tell you what your opinion is. But if, on the other hand, you develop your critical thinking skills, then rather you can stand on your own to decide for yourself what the correct answers are, or at least critically analyze those things that people tell you are supposedly true. So it gives you that confidence and independence, and that is more important than ever for language learners, because of course everybody gets a little bit nervous when you're speaking another language. Moving on, Anglo culture. So Anglo culture was, of course, when I use this term Anglo culture, I'm talking about Western Anglo kind of global domination in a way, but Western Anglo intellectual educational culture springing out of the industrial era, the Industrial Revolution. And this culture was built on the back of the classics. So it was built on the back of Greek philosophy, with a few Christian ideas thrown in, a bit of Christian morality, ancient Greek philosophy, and kind of Roman, Latin structural centralization, and you have something like Anglo culture. And so critical thinking and independence, and from that, ideas such as free speech and freedom of expression kind of spring out of that. And so critical thinking is really at the core. It's a core aspect of Anglo intellectual culture. And so, because language and culture are deeply interconnected, that's been studied, and there is a strong correlation between those who are able to submerge themselves into the culture of a language and those who actually learn the language quicker. So that means if you are someone who is able to basically become more English culturally, then your language skills will improve by correlation. We don't really, we can't say for certain there's a cause and effect relationship there. But what we can say is that the more that you engage with Anglo culture and the more English you feel, then the more English you will sound. So language and culture is deeply related. Critical thinking is part of Anglo culture, and so engaging with that and learning about that, well, it's good for your language. Okay, moving on to the next point. Clear expression and active listening. So by improving our critical thinking skills, it actually helps us to express our ideas more clearly, because we begin to understand concepts like clarity and vagueness. Basically, whether people are clearly and logically expressing things, or whether it's not so clear, and actually understanding why that is. So critical thinking helps you with that, and therefore helps you understand your own clarity of expression. And then active listening, so really listening to what someone's saying, not being swayed by the emotion, but listening to the content of what they're saying and being able to construct the argument that this person is really making so that you can decide for yourself if it's convincing. And so they are just some reasons why I personally think that it's a good idea for English learners to learn about critical thinking. And that's what we're going to be doing today. So let's get going. So what is critical thinking? Answers in the chat if you can answer Pavia's question. Otherwise, answers in the chat if you know what critical thinking is. So let's have a look about this. Critical thinking. So a very broad kind of general definition of critical thinking is that it is these four ideas here to my, where are they? To my left, where they are. Analyzing, evaluating, synthesizing information. So let me talk about what on earth those things mean. So analysis, analyzing, is basically looking at something closely, examining it, trying to understand it in some way. This is the idea of analysis at a deep level. Then evaluating, this means that we are judging it. We are making a judgment. That's right. We are judging the material. We're not being non-judgmental, actually. We're being judgmental. Evaluation requires you, in fact, to be a little judgmental. You have to decide, what do I think about what this so-called professor is saying, all right? What do I think about what this so-called respectable news organization is telling me today? I'm going to evaluate this. I'm going to judge it. I'm going to look at the arguments they're making and the information they're giving and decide for myself, does this seem credible? Of course, we also need to take into account our own biases. That is part of critical thinking, but we're not going to focus on that just now. Then we have synthesizing. That's a fancy word, isn't it? Synthesizing. We're gonna synthesize some stuff, okay? Synthesis. Do you wish to engage in synthesis today? So synthesis is a very fancy way of saying combining. That is synthesis, okay? Synthesis. Synthetic actually means man-made, not natural. But all synthesis actually is a combining. So when we synthesize information, what we're doing is we're combining things. So we read this, we read this, we read this, we synthesize them, and we put them all together, and we come up with a new idea, right? That's synthesis. So that's a very important part of critical thinking because it allows things like discovery and deduction and so on. So let's go on to the next kind of definition of critical thinking. This one is the kind of broad, everyday definition. And then there's the more academic definition of critical thinking, which is basically checking your logic and the logic of other people. So this definition of critical thinking sees the world in terms of arguments. And we'll talk about in a moment what is an argument. That's the way we're going with this. Because when I say argument, I don't mean two people fighting, right? That's a very layman, everyday definition of argue. But the definition of argument we're using here is not about people fighting or disagreeing. It's something else. It's an academic argument. And so this definition sees the world in terms of arguments, and it looks at what are the arguments being made to us, what do we think about those arguments, and how can we evaluate and deconstruct to some extent those arguments, and how can we formulate our own arguments. So that moves on to the next point. That kind of feeds into this next definition, which is about judging information and arguments for soundness. There's a nice bit of vocabulary for you. Soundness. Is it sound or not? This is logic vocabulary. So I'm going to talk about what soundness is and what does it mean for an argument to be sound. We'll talk about that in a moment. Let's move on to this. What is an argument? Let me have a look at the chat and a couple of things that people are saying there. Look at Zoe says, Pavia, it's a slangy way of saying I'm tired of people. It could be. You know, I actually do wonder about this shirt. I wonder about the way that it's said, because actually there's kind of two ways it could be said. Like it could be like the Californian, like the kind of the Cali girl accent, like, ew, people, right? Like, oh, what you doing? You know, what do they say? Like, oh, it's gross. That's gross. Is it gross that they say? What do they say? Gross, something like that. You know, it could be like that Cali girl thing. Or it could be like just a cat that like doesn't like people, and it's like, ugh, people. Right? So yeah, I think it's probably the Cali girl thing, to be honest. But I think it's funny, and I think it's particularly funny for me to wear it. That's why I'm wearing it, okay? Sorry, I'm breaking the fourth wall here. Let's move on. What's critical thinking? Why do we need it? Exactly, Patchu. That's what we're talking about. And I think, should I move my face a little bit? Because I'm kind of getting blocked by my own chat here. It's a little bit annoying, isn't it? I'm going to go over here. Argument, yeah. The logic is valid, but the premises are false. The argument is not sound. Yeah, that's a definition. And I've got my own definition, which is better. I'm joking. That's the common definition. Let's get into it, though, Pavia, because you're getting ahead of the explanation here. So let's talk about an argument first. What is an argument? So here's an example of an argument. You can read that. So it goes a little bit like this, and it can be in any order. You can say, if it's raining, you should take an umbrella. It is raining, therefore you should take an umbrella. We can swap these two around. We can say, it is raining. If it's raining, you should take an umbrella, and therefore you should take an umbrella. I think we all know what this last bit is called. Therefore, you should take an umbrella. Do you know what this last part is called? So this is called the conclusion, isn't it? That's our conclusion. Therefore, you should take an umbrella. I wonder if you know what these parts are called. We're going to talk about it in a moment. So if it is raining, you should take an umbrella. It is raining. Therefore, you should take an umbrella. This is an obvious argument, and it probably seems like quite a good argument most of the time. Let's have a look at something a little bit less clear, all right? So here's an argument a little bit less clear. Donald Trump is a liar. Donald Trump said that Diet Coke helps him focus. Therefore, Diet Coke is bad. So, someone might say this. right? Yeah, Trump likes Coke, Diet Coke. He says it's good, but he's a liar. So, Coke sucks. It's not so clear what argument is being made here, or if it's logical, but it seems that there is an argument, or maybe several arguments being made, and if we come to analyze that, then we'll start to see whether or not it's logical and what sort of, we can say, implications there are, or what things are implied. When we imply something, that means that because of something we say, it seems that we're saying something else is true, but we're not openly saying that, right? So we'll talk about that later. So this is a little bit less clear. Then let's look at something completely unclear, right? And the point I'm making by showing you this stuff is I'm just showing you we're actually surrounded by arguments all the time. And they don't all look like this. Like this is, oh yes, that's obviously an argument. Some can look like this and some can look like this. And when they look like this, it gets a little bit difficult, doesn't it? You see what we've got here? It says, if textbooks really taught us how to think, everyone who read one would be a genius. But they don't. They box us in, scrap them, and maybe students will finally learn to think outside the pages. After all, imagination never came with a table of contents. What do you think about that? So, it's much less clearer what the argument or arguments are here. There's something that's being said, there's some claims being made, but what's actually going on with that? And, every day in conversation and in reading and listening to information, then we get this kind of stuff all the time. We get these kinds of ideas coming at us, and we have to somehow decide what exactly is being said there. So we're going to talk about how you go about analyzing something like that. And in order to do that, we need to understand some vocabulary for arguments. We basically need to be able to talk about the different parts of an argument, a logical argument. So what do we call the different parts of a logical argument? All right. Very useful bit of vocabulary when talking about arguments is validity. Is it a valid argument? Now, what does that mean? Let me just reconnect my microphone. I can hear it crackling. I don't know if you can. Hopefully that didn't make a horrible noise and blow everyone's ears up. So, is it valid? Validity. Is it valid? So a valid argument means that the argument has a logical form. Okay? So let's have a look at this. It says, I'm a man. I don't cook. Therefore, men don't cook. Now, is this a valid argument? Oh, and hello, Sylvia. Hello, Nisat. And hello, Riadol. How are you doing? So, This is not a valid argument, particularly because here there's the implication that all men don't cook rather than some. So this is not the form of a valid argument. I'm going to explain that in a moment. Let's have a look at this one. I'm a man, I don't cook, therefore some men don't cook. This is a valid argument. In other words, this argument is logical. That's essentially what we mean when we say a valid argument, that the argument is logical. So I'm a man, I don't cook, therefore some men don't cook. By the way, this is not true because actually I cook. I'm a man, I cook, therefore some men don't cook. Now, is this a valid argument? I'm a man, I cook, therefore some men don't cook. That's a little bit more difficult to say, isn't it? Something's changed here, and we need to be able to say, does that affect how valid this is? Well, let's break that down a little bit. What are we actually saying here? We're saying that there is something that's true. There's kind of a, what do we call this? A truism or a tautology, something that's always true, right? And we have one part of that here, which is an implied inference, which is always true. And that is, if one of group X, if one of group X does something, or if we could change this and say, if at least one of group X does something, it means some X do that thing. And this is actually an implied inference in this argument. So then we can say one of group X does this thing, or does a thing. If at least one of group X does something, it means that some X do that thing. Therefore, some group X do a thing. Okay? And this structure is valid. What that means is this structure is logical. And so, if this is true, the first part, if it is true that one of group X does it, then it is also true that some of the group do it. So if it is true that one man cooks, then it is true that some men cook. And that's called a valid argument. Now, what if we have this situation? What if we say, for example, if one man can fly to the center of the sun, then some men fly to the center of the sun. Why do I keep saying sun like that? Sun. Therefore, some men fly to the center of the sun. Now, let me ask you some questions about this. First of all, is this a valid argument? What do you think? If one man can fly to the center of the sun, if one man, let's not say can fly, but flies, if one man flies to the center of the sun, then some men fly to the center of the sun. Therefore, some men fly to the center of the sun. Is this valid? So, I'm going to explain to you now, and hopefully this will help you say what validity is. This is valid, but it's not true. Why is that? Well, we haven't talked about the premise. And the premise here for this is one man flies to the center of the sun. That's the premise, but the premise isn't true because no man flies to the center of the sun is the actual truth, right? So therefore, this argument is still valid, but it's not true. And when we have an argument which is valid but not true, what we say is that it's not sound. And that's the difference between validity and soundness. So a valid argument is basically a logical argument where the conclusion is true if the premises are true. And a sound argument is a valid argument where the premises and therefore conclusion are true. Okay? So basically a sound argument is one step up from a valid argument. A valid argument is like a good logical structure, and then a sound argument is a valid argument, but it is actually true because the premises are also true. And therefore, if the premises of a valid argument are true, then we have a sound argument. We have a true argument with a true conclusion. Okay? And we've actually been looking at a very basic form of argument here. It's called modus ponens, by the way. How do you spell this? Modus ponens? I think it's like that. And it's like, if A, then B, A, therefore B. That's modus ponens. That is a valid structure. That's a structure of a valid, that's one type of valid argument. So any argument of this structure is valid. That doesn't mean it's true, because it might not be sound, but it is valid, as in it is logical, right? So, you know, if I say, if bananas grow on Mars, then there is oxygen on Mars. Okay? If bananas grow on Mars, then there is oxygen on Mars. Bananas grow on Mars. Therefore, there is oxygen on Mars. That's valid. But it's not true, is it? That premise is not true. Bananas actually don't grow on Mars. So it's not true. So, how about if we try to discover some other things about this? Because actually, if bananas did, if for example, Elon Musk goes to Mars and, hang on, question from Sylvia, how do you say machismo? Is it chauvinist? I don't think it might be male chauvinist, but as I understand it, chauvinist is a term which generally means someone who is irrationally proud of something. Whereas a male chauvinist is like irrationally proud of being male. What do you call someone who's irrationally proud of being female? That's an interesting one, isn't it? But yeah, male chauvinist. I think, to be honest, Sylvia, the term would be sexist. Or maybe misogynist, which is supposed to mean woman hater, misogynist, but it's generally just used as in that way, in kind of machismo, as they say. Or what's it, machista, they used to say in Spain. Yeah, anyway. So if Elon Musk goes to Mars and he grows bananas, and we're like, what? He's grown bananas on Mars? Nobody thought that was possible. Then actually we would say, oh yes, well therefore there is oxygen on Mars. Our science was incorrect. There is oxygen on Mars, after all, right? So this is a logical, it's a valid argument. It's just we think it's not true, right? Because we think actually bananas don't grow on Mars. Can we make some other decisions about this though? What about if we say this? What about if we say, if bananas grow on Mars, then there is oxygen on Mars? And what about if we say, bananas don't grow on Mars? So this is true now, right? This is true, yes? Bananas don't grow on Mars. Therefore, there is not oxygen on Mars. Now, what do you think about that? Is that a valid argument? We have the inference, which says, if bananas grow on Mars, then there is oxygen on Mars. This we agree with, because you cannot grow bananas without oxygen. Right? Bananas don't grow on Mars. Right? That's true. Therefore, there is not oxygen on Mars. What do you think? Hello, Sleepwalker. The form of this argument, by the way, is like this. It's if A, then B, not A, therefore not B. That's the form. This is not valid. This is a common fallacy. I actually don't know the name of this fallacy off by heart. Maybe Pavia can tell me. But it is actually it's a common fallacy. I think it's called something like denying the premises. But it's a fallacy. Because if the premises aren't true, that actually doesn't disprove the conclusion, right? Because, think about this. If bananas don't grow on Mars, there could be another reason, right? It doesn't mean that there's not oxygen. Maybe there's no water. Maybe there's no bananas. Right? There's lots of reasons why bananas may not grow on Mars. So we say with this is invalid. This is not a valid argument. It's a fallacy. Okay? But here's a good one for you. We're going to go back to this again. Okay? But this time, we're going to change it around a little bit. Okay? So we keep our, if bananas grow on Mars, then there's oxygen on Mars. We all agree with that, right? That must be true. Okay, plants need oxygen and carbon dioxide. So to grow bananas on Mars, you need oxygen on Mars. This, we go, yep, that's true. Okay, now what about this? Now I'm going to change this. I'm going to say, there is no oxygen on Mars. So now that's our premise. We're going to say, no, there is no oxygen on Mars, right? Therefore, bananas do not grow on Mars. What do you think about that? Is that valid? Oh, look at sleep. Somebody's had their Weetabix today. It's 3 cappuccinos for Sleepwalker before midday. This is valid. This is valid. So this argument takes the form, if A, then B, not B, therefore not A. That's actually valid. So it isn't that... that's interesting, isn't it? That if you say, if A, then B, not B, therefore A, is valid, but if A, then B, not A, therefore not B, is not valid. It's super useful, by the way, to know that. This is like Logic 101. So if you want to get the foundation of formal logic, it's not really the foundation, it's more like the beginning, the first class of 101 logic is this. If the conclusion is not true, then the premises, or we can say at least one of the premises is not true. Great. Let's have a look at something then. Here's a real situation. If it rained, the ground is wet. The ground is wet, so it rained. What do you think about that? By the way, this is not a second conditional. This is actually a conditional used talking about the real past. It's not the unreal past. So it's not a second conditional. That's why the second clause is in present simple there, not using conditional tenses. Well done. Well done, Sleepwalker. Well done, Patchu. It's not valid. It's not valid. Why? Why is it not valid? Because there are other reasons why the ground can be wet. Yeah, exactly. That's right. Well done. All right, we're getting into it. We're getting logical here, right? There's all kinds of reasons why the ground can be wet. Okay? Maybe my cats went to the toilet. Maybe the neighbor was watering his garden and it came over the wall. Okay. Other reasons why the ground's wet. Okay, how about this one? If it rained, the ground is wet. The ground isn't wet. So, it didn't rain. If it rained yesterday, or if it rained the day before, the ground is wet. The ground isn't wet. So, it didn't rain. This is valid. This is the other form that we talked about before, which says, if the conclusion is not true, then at least one of the premises isn't true. Here, there's only one premises. There's only one premise. So, it's valid. Is it sound? We don't know. In order to check if something's sound, we have to check the truth of the premise. That's how we check if something is sound. So we have to check, is the premise true, right? So we have to check that. So I go outside and I see, is the ground wet? And if the ground isn't wet, then this is valid and sound. And it's a good argument. Okay? But if the ground is wet, then it's still a valid argument, but it's not sound. So when you start to understand this, you start to realize that there are these argument forms. Here's some simple argument forms. If A, then B, A, therefore B. If A, then B, not B, therefore A. So these are simple argument forms, okay? And you can replace A and B with anything, and these will still be valid. They might not be sound, but they will be valid. So you can replace A and B with basically anything you want, and you will have a valid argument. But of course, in order to know if it's sound, you need to check. You need to check if the premise is true, which in this case would be this part here. So that gives you a basic argument form, basic argument structure, which you can apply to anything. So, yeah, just reviewing the vocabulary that we've got there: premises, inferences, and conclusions. So arguments consist of premises, inferences, and conclusions. We start with the premise, or the premises. Premises is the plural. These are old Latin words. That's where they have these weird forms like premises. Premise is one. That's one. Or premises is multiple. Okay, so you start with the premise or the premises. The premise. Why have I suddenly forgot how to spell premise? It's just totally gone from my head. Now it just looks weird. What is your premise? Premise. It's like that, isn't it, with the E? Premise. So let's have a premise, just a nice, lovely premise. A premise. Many people came to watch Prof. Rich's stream. Okay, great. There's a premise. So a premise is just like a statement of fact, isn't it? If it's true, obviously it could be a lie as well, but it's a statement of supposed truth. That's what a premise is, and it's often the start of an argument. The full thing we're talking about here is an argument, the full structure of an argument. So premise. Next we have the inference. Okay, and the inference is the bit where we say if A then B, if not A then it's that part, right? So we say if. And then I'm just going to copy this in. If many people came to watch Prof. Rich's stream, right, comma, then, okay, he'll be happy for the rest of the day. That's a bit sad, isn't it? It's a bit like too much need for social validation. Maybe we should change this to something else. If many people came to watch Prof. Rich's stream, then he'll definitely, right? Then he'll, let's not say definitely, he'll probably stream next week. Okay, so if many people came to watch Prof. Rich's stream last week, then he'll probably stream next week. Let's change that to black. And we're going to make this a different colour. We'll make this blue. Okay, so that part there is called the inference. So we have the premise, the inference, and what comes next? Conclusion. Okay, so are the premises true? Let's say yes. Okay, 15. Should we call that many? Yeah, okay. So we'll say the premise is true, right? Is the inference logical? Yeah, I think so. I think if many people came to watch the stream, then I'll probably stream next week. I think that's true. So we can make our conclusion, therefore, he'll probably stream next week. Okay. So here we have a valid argument where the premises are true, and so we can call this a sound argument. Okay. Because it is valid and the premises are true, that means it's sound. Okay. So, all right, everybody, that's basically the sort of introduction to critical thinking. That's sort of the start of critical thinking. And the next stage well, things obviously get a little bit more complicated from there. So let's have some questions. We're going to go into question time, everybody. So it's Q&A. Type your questions in the chat and I'll do my best to answer them. Thank you very much for coming today, by the way. And may I just take this opportunity to say it would be lovely if you could smash that like button. I forgot how you do that. Oh, here we go. Is that it? Did I do the right thing? Smash that like button and hit subscribe. Oh, there we go. Smash that like button and hit subscribe. And yeah. Right, Q&A. How we doing? There was a question. Where was it? That's it. Pachu says, if A knows B, then B knows C. Does A knows C is valid? Whoa. Hang on a minute. If A knows B, then B knows C. We need to be clear here, Pachu, about what are your premises and what are your inferences, okay? So it's like you're saying, when you say no, are you talking about people? So you're saying like Mike knows Tim, right? And Tim knows Bill, right? And then the question is, does Mike know Bill? Is that what we're saying here? So Mike knows Tim, Tim knows Bill. Does Mike know Bill? Is that the question? So essentially, the question, when you say, is it valid? Well, we need an inference. And the inference is actually something like this. This is your implied inference. The inference is, if Mike knows Tim and Tim knows Bill, then Mike knows Bill. That's your inference. Now, the problem is, this inference doesn't seem like a good inference to me. It actually doesn't seem very logical. Because we can imagine situations where Mike knows Tim and Tim knows Bill, but Mike doesn't know Bill. We can imagine that possibility. So therefore, the inference is the weak part of this argument. However, is the argument valid? Well, yes, the argument is valid. But the question is the inference good? And in this case, the inference doesn't look to be logical. I think that's right. Oh, I need to brush up on my logic. Formally valid but unsound. Yeah. So it is actually logical. Sorry, it's not logical. It is actually valid, but it's not sound. Yeah, I mean, when you first start playing with critical thinking and logic, it is a little bit difficult, but just keep playing with it and you get better with it over time. You know, just keep diving into it a little bit, pure care, and you'll get better at it. All right, let's see what else we got. brain isn't braining. The question is that a valid paralogic artwork, Pavia? That's the question. Or is it just a dialectic, rhetorical, hypothetical apple? The students are resided in the university premises. The comma, don't forget. The comma. What comma? Oh, is it? Oh, you're right. Oops. There you go. Should have a comma there. I would like to invite a coffee, but I don't find the cashier. What? Really? What do you mean? It should just be below the video as usual. There's like a little link, isn't there? Below the video, which says like, give me a coffee or something. Isn't it? Isn't it there? I can't actually see because YouTube has changed the layout and it's all gone weird. But below the video, there should be like a buy me a coffee thing. You can super chat as well if you want. Of course, coffee is much appreciated, everybody. You can find the link just below the video. It's got long story short, Prophet. I'll be definitely elated if everyone presses the like button. Well, we're doing pretty well for that, actually. Smash that like button. There's some channels they do this thing like, okay, we're going to do a like bomb. Everyone press like button together. I don't know. I think that only works if you've got like 1,000 people watching. Alright, Sleepwalker says amazed at or amazed by. What's the difference? Can we use them interchangeably? Honestly, I think sometimes you guys, you worry a little bit about, things which just, I think you should have bigger fish to fry, in my opinion, in terms of learning a language. But alright, I'm amazed. I mean, most of the time, this stuff, it's about collocation and context rather than meaning, So you're looking for a difference in meaning, but often the difference in meaning can be, quite subtle and not necessarily that relevant. But anyway, I was amazed by the event. I was amazed at the way, it's like, for example, if I was going to use the structure the way they did it, then I would always say amazed at, or would I? I was amazed at the way he cooked that steak. I was amazed by the way he cooked that steak. Yeah, you could say both, but the first one seems better. Whereas if you use a noun, and like a noun phrase, a complex noun, I was amazed by the flying pigs. Yeah, but could you be amazed at the flying pigs? I was amazed at the flying pigs. You could, but amazed by sounds better there. So, there's something going on there with use. Also, there's this sense with by always that like the amazement comes after, whereas with at, it kind of comes at the moment. But it's very subtle. It's like so subtle. It's the kind of thing I don't think you should be considering when you're speaking, really. I think it's something that you should just look for patterns rather than thinking about the meaning difference, if that makes sense. And as for your second question about can you say I was amazed by your performance or I was amazed at your performance, yeah, they both sound good. Espero que tú no esperes que yo te espero. Vale. Pues vamos. Vamos a la playa. All right. Apparently it's all going crazy in Spain, Manuel. Do you know about that? What was that? I saw there was some riots, and they said, what is it? España cristiano, no es musulmano, or something like that, right? Did you see that stuff? We are dealing with complex cultural situations in Europe, folks. It's a complex cultural situation. Dan says, hi Rich, I can catch the ball in with 1 jump or 2 jumps. The car travels up to 400 kilometers on in 2 charges. Catch the ball in 1 jump. Catch the ball with 1 jump. Yep. Yeah, it's all good, Dan. Yep. Up to 400 kilometers on 2 charges. On sounds more American. 400 in 2 charges. There's a difference. Yeah, on 2 charges. Yeah, no, they're both good. There is a difference there, though, in kind of how it's working. Like, it's like I can do 2 charges and achieve something from that, versus the idea of I have to stop 2 times in order to charge, which would be the one where you say in. But they're both okay. If studying logic makes me smarter and I'm still confused, well, if you're smart, do you not get confused? Do smart people get confused? I think everyone gets confused. National Geographic also focuses on critical thinking. University requires critical thinking. Yeah, it's my area. It's my area, Pachu. I'm working with a university right now, and it's my focus. Critical thinking. I don't know what a transition word is, Manuel. But comma normally comes after all kinds of stuff. I don't want to get into it. Punctuation. After adverbial clauses, for example. It's more interesting actually to talk about when you don't need a comma, which is when you have a conjunction. So in British English, that means and doesn't need a comma because and operates as a conjunction. And other words that operate like a conjunction, like because, and if actually also operates like a conjunction, which is why if you change the order of the conditional so that the if clause is second, then you don't have a comma. For all it's worth, the subject of logic seems too discombobulating or mind-boggling for me, and I'm out of my depth. No, you just need some bite-sized stuff, Julia. The more you play with it, the easier it gets. If nothing is impossible, then is it possible for something to be impossible? If nothing is impossible, nothing is impossible, then is it possible for something to be impossible? Or is that logically illegal? The thing is, Pavia, a better way to express your paradox is like this. Why am I still in suggestion mode? We could say nothing is impossible, right? Now, if that's true, then it's not possible for anything to be impossible. So if we can actually say if nothing is impossible, then it is not possible for anything to be, or we could even say then everything is possible, right? And we could also say if nothing is impossible, then it is not possible for, what did you say? Anything to be impossible. Is it possible for something to be impossible? It is not possible for something to be impossible, right? That is actually valid, but it's a paradox because if nothing is impossible, then that means, right? It means it is impossible for anything not to be possible. But wait, we just said nothing is impossible. You see? So, yeah, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because if nothing is impossible, then it is impossible for anything not to be possible. However, if it is impossible for anything not to be possible, then it's impossible for nothing to be impossible. Therefore, it's impossible for nothing to be impossible. So, therefore, this premise is false. Some things are impossible. According to logic, by the way. We should say that this is human logic. We are within the realms of humanity and what we might call the lower level of the double-decker bus of spirituality. The upper level doesn't necessarily work in the same realm as logic. All right, Sylvia, good to see you. Thank you very much. Have a lovely rest of your day. Between Julia and Pavia, I have the feeling that I know nothing. Is this your version of Socrates, Manuel? Or was it Aristotle? The more I know that I know nothing. Más what is it? Más sé que no sé nada. Or is it lo más que sé? Más sé que no sé nada. Yeah. Famous philosopher. So how are we all doing, folks? What's going on in the world? Ooh. What do you think, Gingy? Huh? Kitty. Yeah, he doesn't want to be disturbed right now. Unfortunately, not going to entertain. Okay, just leave him to it. All right, no one's got any news. All right, well, it was good to see everyone today. Good to talk to you. Hope you enjoyed the stream. Hang on, what have we got here? Question from Pachu. How to summarize group discussion in campus or university class? What do you mean? Take notes. Understand them. Write in your own words what happened. Take notes. Reflect. Understand them. You could order them logically. Summarize them. You know, that's it, isn't it? Don't think we need to be too formulaic about this. Don't use GPT. If you're practicing summarizing, do it yourself first. Then use GPT later, see how it does it. If it's pragmatic, then yeah, GPT is good. But if you're actually practicing the skill of summarizing, which is really important, then make sure you do it yourself first. It's a workout for your mind. Okay? If you're planning on going on a run once a day, you can't just jump in your car. You have to go on a run. If you jump in your car, you'll still get to the place, but you won't get any healthier. All right, question from Dan. If I use right as a noun, should I say the right or only right? He's seated on the right. Well, yeah, we can use right as a noun, but when we use right as a noun without an article, then it tends to refer to the general concept of morally or ethically right. So, you know, right is distinct from wrong. Actually, can we say right is distinct from left? Yeah, we can say that as well. So we can actually use right as a noun, but it means it's very general then. However, you do also have these kind of directional adverbials, you know, where I could say something like right of me. So I could say, you know, there's a cat, right? We have a sentence, there's a cat, and then I could just say right of me. A little bit colloquial, because maybe it's a bit better to say there's a cat to the right of me. Sounds maybe a bit more formal. But there's a cat right of me. Like, where's the cat? It's left of you. It's left of you. It's to the left of you. So it's like that, isn't it? Like, sounds a bit more formal if you say it's to the left of you. But it's perfectly okay colloquially to say it's left of you. We could do a bit more about critical thinking if you want, Sonia. I mean, it's something that I'm trying to get back into now. Obviously, it forms a fundamental base of my academic knowledge, being that the first university level qualification that I did was a degree in philosophy. And so right at the heart of philosophy is the idea of critical thinking. So it is kind of a core part of me. And now that I'm teaching with universities, then it enables me to put into practice this sort of skill and to teach it. It's actually quite challenging. I think it's more challenging than just teaching language. Requires a bit more brain power. I'm going to have to start eating more fish. So Pavia says, I'm so happy to see you back here, Rich. My language learning was quite dormant for the past month. Past 1 month? Well, that's not that long, Pavia. Some people go a long time. Some people's language learning goes dormant for like years and then they come back to it. You know, it's quite difficult to maintain language learning constantly without any breaks. It's quite normal to go off and on. You know, it's like anything, like fitness, you know? It's like if someone's a boxer, then they might go through stages of training a lot and other stages where they don't train so much and then they have to get back into it. So that's just part of life, isn't it? The door, let's see, Dan says the door is locked from the inside. Can I omit the? Oh, in inside. So instead of the inside, you just say, is it locked from inside? Yeah, you can, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they both sound good. Yeah, you can omit the for inside. When I read dormant, I realised that I live within a volcanic island. Possibility of eruption is 80% in the next 20 years. Really? Really, Manuel? Is that true? 80% eruption in the next 20 years? Really? So can I buy a cheap house in Tenerife now? I want to buy one right next to the volcano. Is that possible? Do we ask how, what, when, why, where to reach the final answer for critical thinking? So what do we call that? The how, what, when, where, why thing. It's a technique of inquiry, and it would form a method of evaluation, Pachu. So the place where that would fit in is it would be, remember at the start when we talked about analyzing, evaluating, and synthesizing information, then that would be a method of evaluation. Is that right? Yes. So you're asking those questions to help you evaluate the validity and the truth of what you're reading. So Manuel says, magnesium for mental lapsus. I take it every day. Yep. Join the club. I don't know if it helps, to be honest. Maybe. As you all know, or maybe some of you know, I had a very, very serious struggle with deep depression this year between the months of really February and early May. And I'm still kind of gradually coming out of it. Obviously doing a lot better right now, but, don't feel 100% stable just yet, because it shook me up so much. And I was going to do a class about depression, actually. I'm still planning that. It's just, to be honest with you, I don't quite have the stomach for it yet, because I've been so shaken up by that period of depression. So I'm not quite ready to talk about it yet, but I want to talk about it. And during that time, I basically stopped taking supplements entirely. And then I took them again. And, to be honest, I don't know if they really help or make a difference or whatever. You just kind of have to hope they do. Read the literature. Apply some critical thinking. And, there's lots of evidence to show that all kinds of stuff do all kinds of things, zinc, magnesium, iron, like they all seem to do things when you take them, but it's all based on correlation studies. Yeah, I'm hoping to do that, Pachu. I'm hoping to do a class about depression because, I think it is an important topic, and I have done streams on mental health before. Specifically, we talked about seasonal affective disorder, and we've spoken generally about some mental health topics and, things you can do about them. But this one's going to be a little bit different because, I was very deeply impacted actually by that period. And yeah, it was pretty much unbearable, actually. So yeah, I do want to talk about that. But, if anyone has the solution for depression, then obviously they're going to be the wealthiest person in the world, because I think it's almost an unsolvable. There's no solution really. There's just things you can do that don't even really help you tolerate it. It's just help you kind of continue with difficulty. And I'm considering maybe it's about time that I really got into Stoicism, because apparently that's the way. That's the one that really faces up to it. And I have some friends who are really into Stoicism. Yeah, we all have a little bit of depression, Pachu, but that's the distinction, isn't it? Because, a little bit of depression or feeling a little bit down is normal, but real deep depression is really dark. It's really dark. And the kind of day-to-day advice, like go outside, do exercise, talk to people, although it may or may not be helpful in some greater scheme, for the person who is deeply depressed, they won't notice at all if it's helpful. Like just zero. Because the doom is so strong that the pleasure is just gone from everything. So it's really tough. And it feels so chemical as well, because you can even recognize how futile it is to have such a negative mindset. So, you can recognize it and you can say, look, there's no point in thinking like this. There's no point in being like this. But you can't change it just because you think that. So I do think it'd be something good to talk about, because I don't think everyone goes through that deep depression, for one. But I think it's something that can affect anyone. Some people suffer from it kind of biologically or genetically, but it is something that can potentially hit anyone. So I do think it's worth talking about and considering ways of guarding yourself against it, basically. Suffice to say, or, take it for granted that, of course, there are many, many things which help me immeasurably, and looking back, that's obvious. At the time, I wouldn't have been able to really recognize that, but, friends, family, definitely the church, obviously, no doubt about it. Yes, have to give credit to my personal saviour, Jesus Christ, of course. He's pretty important to me. But that's the thing as well with depression. If you are religious, and, speaking as a Christian, if you're a Christian and you go through depression, then, of course, it comes coupled with spiritual dryness. So when you go through depression, you feel like your prayers are, you're praying to a silent wall. You're talking to yourself. Everything's going unanswered. You don't feel any connection with God. That's a deep component of depression for someone who is religious, because obviously if you're religious and you do feel a deep connection with God, but you're kind of depressed, well, you're not going to be that depressed, actually, because it's like, well, everything's falling apart, but hey, I feel connected to God, so, that's all right. So, of course, for people who are religious, then it goes hand in hand. Spiritual dryness comes with it. Anna Maria says, I have a friend with depression and I know how it is, but talk with somebody in these moments when you feel down and it can help you. Yeah, I mean, I believe that, but I think it's also important to acknowledge that when someone feels deeply depressed, they will not recognize in that moment that it helps them. They may even say it to be polite, right? But they won't recognize it at the time. Just bear that in mind if you're speaking to one of your friends who's depressed and you think you're helping them, and maybe you are, but just bear in mind that they might not recognize it. Don't get offended by that, because that's just part of depression. But of course, the other thing is, I think if you get depressed, it's good to recognize that in yourself. Don't trust your own feelings. So you might get depressed and feel so bad, and then someone tries to help you, but you still feel bad. Well, you can still thank them, right? Because you're going to be reasonable about this and think, look, they are trying to help me. It doesn't, even if I don't feel better, right? We can still be nice people even when we're depressed. Depression is the kind of feeling where we find that things we usually find fascinating no more interest to us, and we're scared of doing something that helps a bit. I think that's definitely an effect. And it's definitely not good. It's an element of depression which I would call malaise. Pavia is what you're talking about. So that's like a malaise where you just can't get joy from things, which is a definite effect. But the worst part for me this time was the doom. And how can I describe this? This is what I've been thinking about with the class, that I want to talk a bit about that. It's like the feeling that everything is terrible. That feeling. The feeling that everything is really bad. That you're really bad. That you've done things that are really bad. That the world's really bad. That everything's falling apart. There's no point in anything. Like, it's like really, really deep sense of like doom. And that is the worst. Like, it is horrendous, you know. I think I would say it's pretty close to the center of hell. Yeah, of course, Sleepwalker. I totally agree with that. Yeah. And, you know, I do, of course, seek professional help. I don't think you can deal with this stuff on your own. Not at all, you know. And I'm quite happy to be honest about that. I mean, I use medication. I have had therapy. You know, I've taken part in support groups, you know, all of those things. And, you know, and the Bible and the church as well, which are part of that. And professionals in the church as well. Meeting with them, having discussions with them, you know, like your vicar. You know, if you're a member of a church, a vicar is an obvious person who to talk to if you're feeling like that. And of course, professional therapists as well. But of course, good therapy ain't cheap. Depression's a bitter pill to swallow every now and again. It takes time to heal. It's a great idea to talk with Jesus and open your chest and ask for guidance. Yes, obviously. It's very good that you open the illness like depression. I'm not sure what you mean by opened the illness, but if you mean like talking about it, I have no problems. I don't have any problem talking about it. Completely okay. I mean, I think I'm quite an open person anyway, to the extent where actually I'm quite inappropriate at times. I sort of overstep. I overstep boundaries by opening up on topics that people don't necessarily want to hear about. So it's something that I often try to monitor a little bit when I'm talking to people. But I don't, you know, I'm not a super private person in terms of the information about myself. I think that we're called to be truthful and speak the truth in love. I think that's always an important part of that. It's the in love part that actually I find difficult. Speaking the truth, or speaking what I believe to be true, at least, I don't have an issue with. But even if it's, you know, challenging, obviously we all have deep challenges which are very difficult to talk about. But on the most part, I don't have a problem talking about that. But the in love part can be quite challenging sometimes, I think, for me personally. Different people find different elements of truth challenging in different ways. You know, for me, sometimes I just blabber about the truth. And then I don't consider the consequences of what I've just said. You know, just because you're speaking the truth, it doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do. Because sometimes the right thing to do is not to say anything. It's not about lying, okay? Lying isn't a good thing to do. But sometimes, you know, you don't need to go up to someone and say, hey, you're a bit fat, aren't you? You know, for example, right? You know, it's not always the good thing to do to say that. Of course, if someone asks you and says, do you think I'm fat? Well, I think you should be honest. But again, honesty in truth. Alcohol, Alexander, is not a good way. And this is the thing about alcohol. I do have some experience, by the way, with alcohol. The thing about alcohol is it works really well short term. Like, it is so effective short term, right? It's like if you want to have 3 or 4 hours of just joy, right? Then alcohol will do that pretty reliable, you know? It's pretty reliable. Pretty much reliably will do that. I'm not sure if joy is the right word, actually. Maybe joy isn't the right word. Is joy the right word? I'm not sure. Maybe there's a better word, but yeah, I mean, it'll do it. But it doesn't last. And it's damaging over time. So it's damaging and it doesn't last. So the next day, you're going to feel worse. You might not feel that bad if you've just drank a bit, but you will feel worse emotionally as well. And then you look forward to the next time that you can have your 3 or 4 hours of joy. So that is the problem with alcohol. It's an effective short-term treatment which is addictive and damaging over time. So it's not the answer for me, Alexander. But yeah, I have some experience. But no, I don't drink alcohol now. Anna Maria says, I know what you're saying, but this moment when you recognise you have depression is a big step. So don't try before you think. Try to think in today. Step by step will be better. Yeah. Well, I'm through it at the moment, Anna Maria. I'm pretty stable now. I think we all are, Sonia, and I think that's an important thing to say. This is why, much to my discredit, I have never read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. Do you know that book? Is it Meditations? Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, which is it's basically his diary. And he was the emperor of the Roman Empire. And he had all kinds of horrible things happen to his family, although he was considered one of the last of the great emperors. And he went on to define aspects of Stoicism. He's one of the kind of grandfathers of Stoicism. And he said, at some point, it becomes a heroic act just to get out of bed. And I think that goes to the heart of what you're saying about, people being a warrior. This is we're talking here about the emperor of Rome called it a heroic act to get out of bed. And this wasn't because of physical health problems either, although it could be. But in his case, it was the suffering he was going through because of the death of his son, I believe. Thanks, Julia. Much appreciated. Yeah, alcohol is not a solution for sure. I mean, but the thing that we should acknowledge, though, Julia, is that alcohol is a solution, but just for 3 or 4 hours, and it's damaging. See, that's the thing I think you have to say, right? To be honest, because if you find someone who is relying on alcohol to overcome depression, you can't tell them that alcohol's not a solution, because they know that it is. So you can only tell them the truth, right? So you have to acknowledge, I get it. Alcohol helps you in those moments. I get it. But you have to know that it don't make things better the next morning. And over the long term, things will get worse. And it's destructive. It begins to destroy you. I mean, yeah, it'd be fantastic if we could just, have bottle of wine after bottle of wine indefinitely, and just not have any negative consequences, right? But here we're talking about utopia. We don't have that. It's not the real world. So, nope, doesn't work. All right, everybody. Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me today. My name's been Professor Rich. I hope you've enjoyed the stream. I hope you've enjoyed listening to me ramble on about various things. All the best for your critical thinking today, everybody. If you haven't yet, then make sure you smash that like button. And hey, why don't you, once this stream's done, you just send this video to anyone you think who might be interested in learning some critical thinking right now, and tell them that it will give them a little boost to their English, as well as a very brief introduction to the basic fundamentals of Critical Thinking 101. All right. Have a nice day, folks, and I will catch you later. All right. Bye-bye now.